Ah, you're here! Welcome, welcome. Take a seat. Did you bring a drink? Some tea? Some coffee? Trust me, this is gonna be a long adventure, and you're gonna need it. We're going to talk about something amazing. Something that changed the world not once, not twice, but multiple times. Video games. You see, I'm somewhat of a lover of history. Today, the video game world is dominated by all sorts of things, both bad and good. Loot boxes, battle passes, and microtransactions, sprawling open worlds, branching storylines, and 3 million polygon graphics, online 256 player lobbies, cozy format horror games, and small indie game classics. Gaming has grown from a hobbyist industry to a big business. How did that happen? Why did it happen? Were there always this many anti-consumer business practices? Were games filled with bugs and glitches on launch day from the beginning? And what led to the greatest gaming hits of all time? Well, to figure that out, we have to go to the beginning. And I really mean the beginning. So let's go back in time, shall we? Okay, you might be wondering where this series is gonna start, and if by some miracle this brilliant Flash game is the start of all video games. Well, obviously no, but the setting of 2007's hit Flash game Age of War is actually very fitting for the beginning of gaming. Why? For those of you who have played games like The Witcher or Baldur's Gate 3 and the digital version of Monopoly, there is one big thing these games have in common. Without the pre-existing cards, dice, board, and physical games, overall, big parts of these games wouldn't exist. Gwent wouldn't exist without the thousands of card games that came before it. Baldur's Gate 3 would not be the same game were it not for the tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, and Monopoly wouldn't exist without, well, Monopoly. So, back in around 9000 BC, the very first game in known history was invented. Now, if you've watched Lost, you know, thanks to Locke, that backgammon is the oldest game in the world. That is in fact completely wrong. We don't know a lot about the first game ever made. I mean, we don't know the rules, nor do we know its actual name. However, archaeological findings suggest that it was a Mancala-like game, where you move rocks around the playing field and whoever ends up with the most in their home wins. In the case of this first game, the only findings that we have are stones that were carved in rows, which isn't really a lot to go on. Only a few thousand years later, Knucklebones became the next big thing. No, not that amazing dice game from Cult of the Lamb, but it is actually pretty close. Prehistoric humans did in fact make use of talus bones and knuckle bones to create a kind of dice to play games, and there are countless pieces of evidence for this, though none of them were six-sided like most dice are nowadays. And then for you game collection enthusiasts, the oldest known gaming set discovered so far was actually a game called Dogs and Pigs from Turkey from around 5000 BC. We don't know the exact rules of this game either, but gamers are still trying to think of some cool ones to this very day. While I personally am a big fan of games without any hand-holding or tutorials, if no game contained them, nobody would know thousands of years later how they would be played. So luckily, Senet, the ancient Egyptian game, has some more well-known rules. Played on a 30 square board, the game was all about the journey through the afterlife. Another game similar to this was the Royal Game of Ur. Both of these were racing type games, with two opponents throwing a variety of dice to get to the end the quickest, while also making the other's life more difficult. And then, for those of you who have watched the DreamWorks classic The Road to El Dorado and had their first feelings about Shell, you'd know about the Mesoamerican ball game. I don't need to explain the rules. Unlike the movie though, this game was invented around 1400 BC. Chaturanga. When I show you the playing board of this game, you probably know what it turned into. This Indian game from the 3rd century was of course the game that inspired chess, with different pieces representing different units of an army. And then we have Go from 4th century China, where you have to surround your enemy and claim your territory to win. Games like Inscription, Slay the Spire, Gwent, and God forbid, even Monopoly wouldn't exist without the invention of playing cards from China in the 9th century, which quickly spread to the Middle East and Europe and gained widespread popularity. Then their neighbors in India invented snakes and ladders. Yeah, the original version of the board game you can now find everywhere in toy stores. And then, when Europe was in the midst of suffering from the Black Plague, the people in India thought they could do you one better and invented the precursor to Ludo. Because clearly, there wasn't enough suffering in the world yet. From this point on, board games very much became the modern variants that we know of today, such as backgammon in 17th century England, the checkered game of life from the US in the 19th century, and let's not forget the landlord's game, the prototype to, you guessed it, Monopoly. Then there's Risk, invented in France during the 1950s, and the Settlers of Catan, made in Germany in 1995. Of course, there are a few more games that massively impacted today's gaming world on top of all of these. The two biggest examples of this are, of course, Dungeons and Dragons and Magic: The Gathering. Dungeons and Dragons at this point has become one of the most well-known tabletop RPGs of all time, partially thanks to shows like Stranger Things, Critical Role, and Dimension 20. The number of games that would not have existed or would have been completely different without D&D is honestly immeasurable. The same counts for Magic: The Gathering, which brought collecting cards and building decks to a whole new level. A lot of mechanics from most collectible card games are heavily inspired by this game in some way or another, from physical games like Pokemon cards to digital ones like Hearthstone. I'm sure there are many more games that had an impact on the gaming industry and games as a whole that I've missed. So please, if you have any board game or card games that you wish I spoke about, let me know in the comments down below. I'm incredibly curious. But right now, let's rewind the clock a little bit, because we skipped over an incredibly important part of gaming history: pinball. Now you might wonder why pinball of all things is so important for the start of the gaming industry. And the answer is not that amazing pinball game from the Windows XP days. The very first pinball machines almost broke the entire gaming revolution in the US before it could even start. How? Well, when the very first pinball machine was invented back in 1931, the gaming world looked a lot different. First of all, Baffleball, invented by David Gottlieb, a showman and an inventor, did not feature any electronics. The plunger did exist though, so the game consisted of the player shooting a ball up and hoping that it would end up falling inside of one of the many pockets awarding high points. For just 1 penny, you could shoot up to 7 balls. People kept track of scores in their heads, and because there were no flippers or any other type of interactive piece outside of the plunger, the main technique to improve your score was by quite literally tilting the whole cabinet. Baffleball wasn't a big hit at the beginning, but it quickly grew to become a massive success, selling as many as 400 cabinets a day. And because Gottlieb had a proper assembly line, none of the competitors working out of garages could compete. Not for lack of trying though, because just a year later, an essential part of pinball was invented by his competitor, Harry Williams. The tilt mechanism was quite literally a system designed to prevent players from tilting or moving the pinball machine too much by ending the game if it was triggered. enforcing a lot more skill instead of just brute force and flipping the whole cabinet to win. Then he doubled up and invented the very first electric pinball machine, called Contact. The Contact referred to the pockets which would pop the ball back into play if it fell within them, so you could continue scoring points. And yes, those are still used in pinball machines to this day. While David Gottlieb was aware of Harry Williams and his other competition, something else was brewing that was going to shake up the industry a lot more. Specifically, gambling. Now, slot machines like the ones we know today and see countless streamers losing their money on, of course, already existed since 1894, but the combination of pinball and gambling was not a good thing in the days of the Prohibition, when crime fears were at an all-time high. Politicians and states saw pinball and gambling as one and the same, and therefore actively banned all forms of pinball very quickly. This is also what could have broken the gaming industry in the US early due to how severe the reactions were. This handsome Italian man, for example. Wait, no, not Mario. Italian-American mayor LaGuardia had police confiscate pinball machines and held a press conference where he demolished several machines with a sledgehammer. In New York alone, over 3,000 pinball machines were confiscated, and all of the steel from, for example, the balls, ended up supporting the war effort against Nazi Germany, with a total of 7,000 pounds of metal scraps being collected from these machines. The ban in New York lasted for almost 35 years, and once New York banned it, most other counties very quickly followed. So, the challenge went from just inventing really cool pinball machines to figuring out a way to prove that the game involved more skill than luck. And it took a while for anything along those lines to really succeed. In 1947, one of Gottlieb's engineers invented the very first flippers in a machine called Humpty Dumpty. Yeah, I know, that's not really the greatest name, but it did kind of make pinball what it is today. While Humpty Dumpty had 6 flippers built in, a man named Steve Kordek invented triple action. Okay, that's a really cool name. And changed it into the style that we know of today, with the 2 main flippers at the bottom. Thanks to the addition of flippers, proving that skill was required to be good at the game, some states relaxed their laws quite a lot, though New York stayed tilted until the late 1970s. Now, something important to know is that there were already coin-operated amusement machines far ahead of pinball machines, called novelty games. From Husky Grip, a game that tested, well, your grip, to mechanical baseball games, horse racing, hunting, and western gunfights. A lot of different novelty games were invented. Once the 1960s came around, novelty games had become a lot more complex, with lights being added to them to set the player apart from the background. A good example of this is Speedway, a racing game where you had to dodge projected images of other cars. Hell, it even had sounds to simulate crashes. Novelty games, unlike pinball machines, were never really banned, which meant that they were still found all over taverns and pubs in New York throughout the years. Then, in 1961, the Cavalier was opened, also known as the very first restaurant and arcade. The same year, a group of students started an experiment that would officially be the start of the electronic game industry. But more on that next time. Thank you so much for watching this very first video in what will probably be a very long series of videos about the history of video games. Let me know if you learned anything new in the comments down below, or feel free to give me a heads up if you notice that I made a mistake about the facts in this video. I'll make sure to correct myself in the next one with your comment attached. I'm not sure when the next episode in this series will be. It takes quite a lot of time to properly make these, so if you want to be the first to see it when it comes out, feel free to subscribe down below. It also helps me out a lot. If you're curious about any of my other videos that are maybe not as related to gaming history, Here's one about how Wii Tanks was one of the best games of a generation, and another one about how controls make or break games. Outside of that, again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Cheers!